Hello everyone, Vulcan here with the second part of my shipping discussion video. As was said in my last video, this part will be covering Bumblebee versus Black Sun. Therefore, we'll be covering Blake's relationships with Yang and Sun to see which of them is more likely to have a romantic relationship with her. However, like I said in my last video, I want to make clear that while I may or may not endorse any given ship, it is not the most important thing I look for in the show by any stretch. Be sure to watch the first part of my shipping video for my reason behind this. Both ships have a lot of merit in my view, and a lot of that has to do with how Sun and Yang both have similar characteristics that work well with Blake. Both are very positive characters, which is very good for countering Blake's cynicism and serve to break through the wall she withdrew herself in. Throughout the story, both characters have done a lot to bring about change in Blake's character. As such, I can definitely see why many ship her with either of the two, and also why fans of both sides are constantly at each other's throats. So let's start off by examining Blake's development from the start of the series. At that point, Blake was never very receptive to anyone, mostly keeping to herself. The first time we saw her outside of her trailer was when she shut down Weiss as the latter was giving RWBY a piece of her mind. Before RWBY could express gratitude to Blake for saving her, she walked away. However, we see her character changing ever so slightly as the series progresses, although this wasn't because of Yang in Volume 1, but Weiss. Weiss's comments about fondness after their first encounter with Sun served to slowly aggravate Blake until she became frustrated enough to slip she used to be with the White Fang herself. This revealed to us the reason why Blake often kept to herself, that being the fact that she's a fondness and wanted to avoid being discriminated for it. The result of the final arc in Volume 1 was Weiss accepting Blake for who she was and no longer holding on to her prejudice toward the fondness so readily. Blake also became more open to others, albeit not to as great of an extent as we see later in the show. However, this is still important because without it, Yang's attempts to get Blake to let go of her problems wouldn't have been so successful. Blake needed to know that she was accepted by her team no matter what she did in the past, and there was no better way to show this than to have the one most affected by the White Fang accepting her. Volume 2 is where things really begin to kick off between Blake and Yang, and this was observed not within a single arc, but throughout the volume as a whole. Blake's obsession to bring down Roman and the White Fang was eating into her school and personal life, even depriving her of sleep. No one in Team RWBY took as much note of this as Yang, who was the only one to know how to draw out Blake and talk to her about her issues. The most important scene was when Yang told Blake the story of when she went to look for her mother and was saved by her Uncle Crow. Yang revealed such an intimate part of her life to show Blake how strongly she relates to her and how she didn't want to see her destroy herself to achieve her goal. Blake softened up a lot thanks to this, even accepting to go to the dance. Additionally, Yang constantly expressed confidence that Blake would come through, showing she believed she knew Blake really well. Ultimately, she was proven right, and it was thanks to her that Blake changed for the better afterwards. We don't get to see any more significant interactions between them in Volume 2, but we do get to see the extent of Blake's change at the start of Volume 3. In it, Blake became far more expressive and humorous. While one could argue that it's because the animators improved in creating expressions, Blake was still far less deadpan compared to others than before. However, this doesn't mean Blake was completely over her worries about the White Fang, or more specifically Adam, as seen after Yang's fight with Mercury. When that took place, Blake was worried that Yang may have been caught up in the moment and hurt Mercury needlessly. It reminded her of the way Adam transformed, starting from a simple accident. Blake wanted reassurance from Yang not because she didn't trust her, but because she was worried that someone else she cared strongly about would become violent and cruel. A lot of people hated Blake for this moment, but I found it understandable because she didn't want to go through the pain of seeing someone she cared about become someone she didn't know again. So fast forward to the last episode of Volume 3 when Yang discovered Blake left her. It was clear that Yang was more upset by Blake running away than the loss of her arm. Volume 4 also shows that Yang was upset due to her powerlessness, but that's a different matter. We do see at the very start of Volume 4 that Yang still thinks about Blake, symbolized by the book she sees next to her. All in all, Blake's most significant change in the story up to this point was brought about by Yang's more positive and relaxed outlook on life. Where Blake was much more of a cynic, withdrawn, and relentless, Yang used her bright influence to change that, casting a light on the shadow Blake came from. Much the way darkness can't exist without light, it can be said that Yang's character complements Blake's extremely well. From this, we can move on to look at Blake's relationship with Sun. Up to Volume 3, there was never anything considerable between them apart from the fact that the first person Blake ever truly opened up to was Sun. He was the first one to hear the story of Blake's life before coming to Beacon. What led to her opening up to him of all people is unclear, although one can surmise that it had more to do with Sun being a fondness than anything inherent about his character. Up to that point, we hadn't seen Sun do anything to get her to do that other than that he'd spent 2 days with her. Throughout Volumes 2 and 3, nothing major happens between them either, although there was a small hint of there being a romantic interest in Volume 3 with Blake blushing as Sun pointed to her from the stage. However, considering the events that later took place in Volume 4, I don't find this scene to be noteworthy other than an indication of Blake having a small crush on him. It's in Volume 4 that we get a clear picture of their relationship as the two are together almost every time they're on screen. At the start of the volume, Sun was the target of many people's hate because he'd been following Blake since before they got onto the boat. Due to the established time skip being roughly half a year, many pegged him as a stalker, but in my view, considering many of the things that happen in Volume 4, including Sun following Blake, the time skip in and of itself doesn't make sense. For instance, it makes little sense that Blake took as long as she did to get on the boat to Menagerie to begin with, much less Sun following her. This is why I don't think any less of Sun for doing what he did. What's important to me is how Sun and Blake behaved around each other from that point on. At the start of Volume 4, Blake was very similar to herself back in Volume 1, withdrawn, cynical, and unwilling to get close to others. Due to her fear of those close to her being hurt, especially with Adam's threat still being fresh in her mind, she chose to stay away from them and go back home. Her cynicism was particularly apparent when Blake explained to Sun about Menagerie's history. What was great about this was the way Sun contrasted her outlook completely by saying how great it is and that he would never want to leave. Sun was also very effective as a plot device to lighten the mood that would otherwise be very somber had Blake been on her own. One example of this being when Blake's parents were first introduced. Their discussion revolved almost entirely around the fall of Beacon and later to the White Fang. Sun's presence, his antiques, and his thoughtless comments lightened the mood a great deal. While this is simply due to his nature as a comic relief character, I consider this important for Blake's development because like in Volume 2, Blake was gonna need someone like Sun or Yang to learn to relax once more. Without them, I believe she would have been lost in her thoughts, not knowing what to do next while things were happening around her that were out of her control. Things became more serious with Sun when we were first introduced to Ilya. Sun accidentally broke in on Blake's conversation with her father in his rush to tell Blake about seeing a masked White Fang member. There's an implication here that Sun was spying on the conversation due to the way he broke in, though I blame it more on Sun's lack of restraint in social situations rather than anything more sinister. On top of that, I can see why it was done from a writing perspective. While Blake's reasons were obvious from the start, I suspect Mouse and Carey wanted to save it for the end of the volume, which they did, and needed a good interjection. Sun provided the best opportunity for this, and his reason for wanting to see Blake quickly was sound. Warning Blake about the danger in her direct vicinity is to me a sign that he cared for Blake and by extension her family. Had he simply ignored it, thinking it would allow Blake to have more personal space, I strongly believe that at some stage, the White Fang would have come to her doorstep with hostile intentions, posing a real danger to her and her family who would be caught unaware. Also, the fact that Blake herself didn't hesitate to chase Ilya shows that she wanted to take the fight to them, proving Sun essentially read her correctly. Up until this point, Blake hadn't really shown any particular sign that she regarded Sun as anything more than a friend, and one that wasn't even as close to her as the other members of Team RWBY. However, once Sun was injured, she began singing a different song. The reason she wasn't being forthright about her feelings for Sun is due to her wanting to remain withdrawn and not wanting to get close to anyone. This is again due to her fear of seeing them hurt. In the end though, Sun got hurt anyways, causing the walls Blake built around herself to crumble, which allowed her to let her feelings out in the open. When Sun woke up, it was then that Blake explained why she ran away, but Sun put her in her place, saying that although he did get badly hurt, he wouldn't think twice about doing it again in order to protect her. He chose to overexert himself and leave himself open because he knew how much Blake wanted to fight back against the White Fang and would do whatever it took to support and protect her. What's most important here is how Yang would do the same according to Sun, and he's right. This to me shows that both he and Yang see Blake in the same way, and Blake saw this too. It was this moment that encouraged her to not run away again and take the fight to her enemy. Her declaration to restore the White Fang to its former self is the ultimate symbol of the change that both Sun and Yang brought about in her, and it was honestly beautiful to see. So you might be wondering about what my point is now. At this stage, I haven't given any reason why one relationship is stronger than the other. Well, that's just it. Neither one is stronger or has any definitive advantage. As I've just demonstrated, Blake was affected significantly by both Yang and Sun. Both have helped her develop to who she is as of the end of Volume 4. And both have succeeded in bringing down the wall that Blake put around herself to shut out anything that might cause her pain and run away from it all. As such, I believe both ships are as likely to happen as each other. Blake's attitude toward both Sun and Yang is the same, which is particularly evident when they got injured for her sake. Things may well change in Volume 5 or thereafter, particularly once all of Team RWBY reunites, as it will show how the dynamic between Blake and Yang has changed since Volume 3. So as before, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Do you support Bumblebee, Black Sun, both, or even neither? Leave a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to my channel to see more of this. I hope to see you again soon and have a great day.